The air in the Pine Ridge Precision Club hummed with a quiet, masculine confidence, a scent of gun oil and old coffee hanging over the firing line. It was Ella's first day, and the silence that followed her introduction was louder than any gunshot. At 22, with hands that looked more suited to sketching than shooting, she hefted her grandfather's rifle, a worn, stock scarred .22 LR Anschutz 1416, a model older than her father. The polite nods from the members, all men with equipment worth more than some cars, were thin veneers over clear skepticism. A .22? For serious target shooting? That's a squirrel rifle, darling, chuckled Ben, the club's vice president, patting his own custom .308 like it was a thoroughbred. Ella just smiled, a small private thing, and nodded. She didn't explain that the .22 was all she could afford, or that its worn stock fit her shoulder like a remembered hug. She simply set up her mat, her movements economical and sure. The first qualification round was for grouping at 100 yards. The others fired, their heavy calibers punching the air with satisfying thumps. When it was Ella's turn, the report of her rifle was a polite cough in comparison. They peered through their spotting scopes, ready to offer condescending advice. But on the target, a single ragged hole appeared dead center. The 5 shots were indistinguishable from one another. The chatter died. Ben cleared his throat, beginner's luck. The wind was calm. Ella just began packing her kit, her grandfather's words echoing in her ears. Precision isn't bought, Ella. It's built. In the rifle and in you. She had spent 3 years in her backyard, firing thousands of rounds, learning the whisper of the wind, the curve of gravity on a tiny bullet, the heartbeat pause before the break. The club saw a girl with an old gun. They didn't see the countless sunrises spent in the dirt, the calluses, the notebooks filled with wind data and trajectory charts. Her victory that day was small, but it planted a seed of quiet defiance. She had beaten them with fundamentals they'd long forgotten, and she knew this was only the first page of a much longer story. The club's dynamic shifted from polite dismissal to a simmering, unspoken challenge. Ella became a fixture, a silent ghost on the firing line who consistently outshot men who discussed ballistic coefficients over bourbon. The regional black powder and steel competition was announced, a grueling 2-day event mixing modern precision with vintage long-range shooting. It was the club's prestige event. Ben, the reigning club champion, formally invited her to join the team, his tone making it clear he expected her to decline or fail. It's a different world, Ella. Spotters, wind calls, pressure. That little .22 won't reach the 500-yard line, he said. She accepted, her voice steady. I'll use my grandfather's rifle. This time, the scoffing wasn't quiet. She spent the intervening weeks in a state of focused obsession. While others trained with high-powered optics, she practiced with iron sights. While they relied on laser rangefinders, she practiced judging distance by the size of a target frame against tree leans. She stripped and cleaned the old Anschutz until every part was a part of her. The first day of the competition was a circus of technology and testosterone. Competitors unfolded rifles from massive hard cases, tools that looked like they belonged in a spaceship. Ella carried her rifle in a simple canvas bag. On the vintage stage, using her iron sights, she was in her element. She finished third. Respectful nods replaced some of the smirks. Day 2 was the modern precision rifle segment, distances out to 800 yards. The .22 was useless here. From her bag, she produced another rifle, one she'd spent 2 years slowly building, part by part, saving every spare penny. It was a sleek, custom-chassised 6.5 Creedmoor, but its stock bore a small, inlaid piece of wood from the forearm of her grandfather's .22. It was a fusion of her past and her future. The wind was tricky, capricious. She saw seasoned shooters miss entire targets. Ella lay prone, her breathing still. She didn't fight the wind. She listened to it, felt it on her neck, watched it dance in the mirage waves. Her spotter, a reluctant club member named Mike, called a correction. Ella made a micro-adjustment, trusted her own instinct, and broke the shot. The distant steel plate rang with a sound sweeter than any applause. She hit 15 for 15. Mike stared at her, then at the target, a grin breaking across his face. "I'll be damned," he muttered. Ella finished the day, ranked first overall. The club team, carried by her score, won the regional title. The trophy was heavy in Ben's hands, but his eyes, when they finally met Ella's, held a new weight. It wasn't just luck. Victory at regionals was a key that unlocked a new, more intimidating door: the National Long Range Championship. The Pine Ridge team qualified, but the atmosphere was tense. Ella was no longer a curiosity. She was a contender, and for some, that was a threat. Ben's mentorship turned covertly adversarial. During team practices, helpful advice on her grip or stance would come just before a crucial shot. Range assignments for travel were mishandled, putting her on a target with known problematic wind conditions. The message was clear: know your place. The pressure was a physical thing, a tightness in her chest that her grandfather's ghost couldn't soothe. One evening, breaking down her rifle in her modest workshop, her hands shook. Doubt, that old enemy, slithered in. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was an upstart in a world that wasn't hers. She opened a small, locked box. Inside wasn't a medal, but a faded photograph of her grandfather, a much younger man, smiling proudly next to a simple target peppered with bullseyes. On the back, in his neat script, for Ella. The target doesn't care who's shooting, just that the shot is true. It was the reminder she needed. The noise of ego and politics was just wind. She needed to dial it out and hold steady. At nationals, the scale was overwhelming. The best shooters in the country were there, a sea of technical camouflage and ruthless efficiency. During the team event, a crucial 1,000-yard stage, disaster struck. Ben, flustered by a shifting wind, misread his data and missed 3 shots in a row. The team's score was in freefall. Ella, lying beside him, felt the collective panic. Mike, now her steadfast spotter, whispered, "We're sinking." Ella looked downrange, at the flags whipping in contradictory directions. "No," she said, her voice calm. "We're not. Give me a uniform wind call. Ignore the flags at the midpoint. Trust the mirage at the target." It was a call against conventional wisdom. Mike paused, then relayed the data. Ella entered the information, but in the final second, she adjusted again, a tiny, almost spiritual correction born of 1,000 hours of feel. She fired. A hit. She fired again. And again. 5 for 5. She single-handedly salvaged the team's score, pulling them from the brink of elimination into a respectable middle rank. In the quiet afterward, Ben approached. He didn't offer congratulations. Instead, he looked at the old photograph she'd taped to her stock. "My father had a rifle like that," he said, his voice rough. "I never learned to shoot it." He walked away, but the war was over. Ella had beaten the competition on the line, and the one off it. The national finish earned Ella a sponsor. Not a giant in the industry, but a respected family-owned optics company that valued skill over show. It meant better equipment, but also expectations. The next summit was the prestigious, invitation-only Whistling Ridge Invitational, a brutal multi-discipline match held in the unpredictable high desert. Here, the physical and mental game merged. Shooters had to hike miles between stages with all their gear, navigating by GPS to remote shooting positions where targets could appear from 50 to 1,200 yards, with no sight-in shots allowed. It was a test of endurance, skill, and sheer will. Ella trained like an athlete, running with a weighted pack, practicing yoga for breath control. The desert at Whistling Ridge was a living opponent. The wind didn't whisper. It screamed and swirled through canyons, making mirage dance like demons. The sun was a hammer. On the second day, during a punishing hike to a cliffside shooting position, Ella's boot caught a rock. She went down hard, wrenching her knee and slamming her prized rifle into the dirt. Pain shot up her leg. Panic, cold, and sharp followed. The scope was knocked askew. She was miles from help, with a timed stage starting in minutes. Gritting her teeth, she used a tree to stand. Her knee screamed, but the rifle was the priority. With trembling hands, she used a small collimator to roughly re-zero the scope at 100 yards, a crude field fix. The first target was at 400. She had no true zero. It was a shooter's nightmare. Lying in the dirt, her knee throbbing, Ella shut out everything. The pain, the fear, the expensive rifles of her competitors firing around her. She thought of her grandfather's backyard, of the simple joy of a shot well placed. Her first shot was a miss. She used the splash of dust to correct. The second shot clipped the target. The third was a hit. She repeated this, target after target, building a new zero in her mind through trial and error, a display of sheer, raw skill that left her spotter speechless. She finished the stage with a middling score, but it was a victory greater than any trophy. That night in her tent, she iced her knee, a solitary figure in the vast dark. A text blinked on her phone from Mike. Saw what you did today? Legendary. They're all talking. She wasn't just the girl with the old rifle anymore. She was the shooter who could not be broken. The final day awaited, and for the first time, she felt not like an outsider, but a predator. The final stage of Whistling Ridge was called the Gauntlet. 12 targets, unknown distances from 200 to 1,000 yards. One shot each, a 90-second par time. Shooters would start from sprint. It tested everything: physical recovery, mental arithmetic, instinct, and grace under fire. Ella's knee was tightly braced. A storm of pain, she walled away in a corner of her mind. She stood on the starting line, flanked by the sports titans, former special forces, champions with decades of experience. They did not look at her with scorn now, but with a focused, professional assessment. She was one of them. The buzzer screamed. She ran, her pack jostling, her knee protesting. She found her first position, threw herself prone, and her world shrank to the view through her scope. The first target fell, then the second. Her movements were a fluid dance. Load, find, breathe, break, move. She was no longer thinking. She was being a perfect instrument of intent. At the seventh position, a target at 800 yards, the wind did something perverse. It died completely for a second, then gusted hard right. She saw the mirage boil. Her calculated hold felt wrong. In that splinter of a second, she abandoned the math. She thought of the .22 in her backyard, of how to arc a tiny bullet into a leaf. She thought of the feel of her grandfather's hands over hers, steadying her. She aimed not at the target, but at the ghost of the wind itself, and fired. The shot broke. A distant, metallic ping echoed back a heartbeat later. A perfect hit. She finished the sequence, her last shot ringing steel as the final second ticked away. When the scores were tallied, the silence was absolute. The announcer's voice crackled over the loudspeaker. Ladies and gentlemen, your 2024 Whistling Ridge Invitational Champion. Ella avance. The trophy they placed in her hands was cold and heavy. But as she turned, she saw her club members, Ben, Mike, the others, standing together. They weren't just clapping. They were cheering, their faces alight with a pride that was now communal. Ben gave her a firm, slow nod, the final surrender, and the ultimate respect. Later, as the desert sun bled into the mountains, Ella sat alone for a moment. She pulled out her phone and looked at the photo of her grandfather. "We did it," she whispered. In her gear bag, the old .22 rifle lay snug in its case. It was not a relic of a left-behind past, but the foundation of everything she had become. She had outperformed them all, not in spite of where she began, but precisely because of it. The journey from Scoffed to champion was complete, written not in luck, but in thousands of true shots, one perfect bullet at a time.